from horrific medical experiments to crimes of utter savagery and brutality, and even the men who oversaw the whole program of the final solution. The list of names to be forever reviled grows ever larger, and so, once again, we must dive into the abyss to explore even more depths of depravity. Nazi Camp Guards, Part 7. Herta Oberheuser, aka The Beast, Camp Ravensbrück. Kicking off with ladies first, Herta Oberheuser was born on the 15th of May in 1911 in Cologne. Her career path took her down the route of medicine when she enrolled at the University of Bonn's medical school, which she graduated in 1937 with a specialism in dermatology. From here she gained residency in the dermatology department at the University of Düsseldorf. Of course, in the late 1930s, if anyone wanted to get on, societally speaking, in Nazi Germany, you really should join the party, which is exactly what Oberheuser did very soon after her residency began. Her standing as an intelligent and upstanding female role model made her a prime candidate for the Bund Deutscher Mädel, otherwise known as the League of German Girls, in which she served as a doctor. This would seem to be something of an odd shift given her self-made life and intellect to suddenly espousing the virtues of Kinder, Küche und Kirche, or children, kitchen and church. Not the greatest feminist message, but this was the 1930s. Clearly the indoctrination was strong with this one, as Oberheuser would pen several highly anti-Semitic published articles which brought her to the attention of the wider party. In 1940, she was appointed to the role of assistant to the Surgeon General of the SS, Karl Franz Gebhardt, a lofty position in such rapid succession. However, these two creatures would soon etch their names irrevocably in the annals of infamy. In 1942, both were posted to the Reich's only female concentration camp at Ravensbrück. Their remit was the study of better forms of infection fighting and prevention. But this would be far from an ethical study, as they had a whole camp of unwilling guinea pigs to test their various experiments on. They transferred in a group of doctors and nurses from an SS sanatorium at Hohenleichen to act as their underlings, and identified several prisoners they considered ideal test candidates. These were mostly drawn from Polish political prisoners, around 86 in total. Much like how, over in Japan-held territory, their Human Experimentation Department, Unit 731, a topic I've already covered, link in the description, referred to their test subjects as logs. Gebhardt and Oberheuser's team referred to the prisoners under their care as rabbits or guinea pigs. Just another small but striking way to dehumanize the people that they were performing horrific tests on. Perhaps this was a way to make it easier for the consciences of the staff. Nevertheless, it's just further proof of the lack of humanity at play throughout that most insidious of regimes. Oberheuser herself was a very much hands-on kind of leader, performing many tasks herself rather than delegating, conducting gynecological exams on women in a highly humiliating and denigrating manner, and deliberately causing wounds, only to then infect them with various pathogens. She revelled in either conducting or assisting in all surgical procedures. Her surgical aftercare left much to be desired too, often deliberately making wounds and infections worse and denying water to the women, with one Polish woman, Stefania Lotoczka, recalling that when she had finally been given some water, it had been adulterated with vinegar to make it difficult to swallow. Oberheuser would finally end the lives of those too weakened to recover by giving them an injection of, all things, petrol. Even in death, they would still suffer terribly due to multiple organ failure. Of the roughly 86 women subjected to her vile experiments, 5 would die, or more accurately, be murdered, and the rest would suffer crippling and debilitating illnesses that would last for the rest of their days. Ravensbrück was liberated by the Red Army on the 1st of May 1945. Earlier in late March, around 20,000 prisoners had been evacuated with the intention of reaching Mecklenburg, but the Soviets intercepted the column, arresting the guards and freeing the inmates. Oberheuser was put on trial by US forces for her crimes in the so-called Doctors' Trial of 1948. Her previous publishings denouncing the Jews would be used as evidence of her character. Several eyewitnesses and survivors testified against her, one describing her as, quote, a beast masquerading as a human. In her defense, Oberheuser had the gall to claim that the Reich had every right to perform experiments on the ones they did because they were members of the Polish resistance and actively working against the regime. Naturally, she denied ever taking part in the mass killings of Jews, but even if the jury believed this, her other crimes still hung over her. She further admitted to administering around 5 to 6 injections deliberately to cause death. The jury found her guilty of crimes against humanity and war crimes, sentencing her to 22 years imprisonment, but this was commuted to 10 years in January of 1951. This came about due to the post-war judiciary being besieged with protests around the impending executions of other war criminals destined for the hangman. The protesters were of the opinion that reconciliation and reconstruction was better than vengeance. In a slightly similar vein, one supposes, to the aftermath of the US Civil War. In a highly strange move, Oberheuser would be released in April of 1952 on the grounds of good behavior after only serving half of her sentence. Whilst this is normal for everyday criminals, given the gravity of her crimes, this really does baffle the mind. Incredibly, she returned to the medical profession, becoming a doctor in a small town called Stocksee, near Kiel. However, in 1958, she was recognized by a survivor of Ravensbrück and immediately outed. Her medical license was revoked, and her practice shut down. She attempted to appeal this decision to the administrative court of Schleswig-Holstein, but the damage had already been done. The media attention that her case had garnered led to widespread condemnation and protests by other Ravensbrück survivors who followed the case closely and called for her to be tried again for her crimes. This day would not come, however, but she was rightly banned from ever practicing medicine again and was heavily fined for bringing disrepute upon the medical profession. Not exactly the punishment she deserved, but how many times have we thought that in this series? Herta Oberheuser died on the 24th of January 1978, at the age of 66. A far easier life and death than many of those she didn't even have the dignity to call patients. Theodor Eicke, camps, Dachau, and father of the concentration camp system. The man who would go on to take the post of commandant of the infamous Dachau concentration camp, as well as serve as one of the major architects of the entire camp system, Theodor Eicke was born on the 17th of October 1892 in Hundingen, in Alsace-Lorraine, the often contested patch of land that lies between France and Germany. Theodor was the youngest of 11 children, and their father worked on the railway as a station master, although with that many children it's a wonder he had any time for work. Theodor was a terrible student and didn't bother to finish his formal education, joining the army and the 23rd Bavarian Infantry based at Landau. Soon after, in 1913, he was moved to the 3rd Bavarian Infantry instead. With the outbreak of the Great War, Eicke served at the First and Second Battles of Ypres in 1914 and 1915 respectively. He was granted leave to return home in late 1914 so that he could marry his sweetheart, Bertha Schwebel, with whom he would go on to have 2 children, Irma and Hermann, born 1916 and 1920 respectively. 1916 saw him transferred to the 2nd Bavarian Foot Artillery Regiment in time for the seemingly never-ending meat grinder that was the Battle of Verdun. He was a well-trusted soldier, taking on some extra official regimental duties, such as clerk and paymaster, that last one being very important as the man who gives you your hard-won money is not a man to make an enemy of. His conduct in battle was exemplary too, earning him a second-class Iron Cross, but as paymaster he tended to spend more time away from the front. Unlike most German soldiers who were demobilized and sent home after the war, Eicke was retained, still as regimental paymaster, under the new direction of the troubled fledgling Weimar government. He decided to resign his position in 1919 and took up a course at a technical college in Thuringia, but he could not complete the course as he was unable to pay for his tuition. He earned some money on an ad hoc basis by acting as an informant to the local police, before taking the step to joining the force shortly after. He would only remain in this role until 1923, as he expressed many bitter anti-establishment sentiments, and was known to frequent many anti-government rallies, which regularly turned violent. His superiors were forced to invite him to resign from policing. However, this background and experience quickly opened up another opportunity for him as a security guard for the Ludwigshafen branch of IG Farben, which he worked for the next 9 years. On the 1st of December 1928, Eicke decided that he had had enough of the ineffectual Weimar government and joined the up-and-coming Nationalsozialistische Deutsche Arbeiterspartei, no doubt wooed by their charismatic and fiery leader and speaker, Adolf Hitler, a man who seemed to be the only one who was willing to do whatever it took to bring Germany back from the brink and elevate it to the glory that many felt it deserved. Eicke's membership number was 114901. Further joining the SA paramilitary group of party enforcers. But he soon left the SA in mid-1930 to join the far more elite and professional-looking SS, which would have aligned much more with his strict military background. He was one of the first ever members of the SS with the very low number of 2921. In the Bavaria branch of the SS, Eicke proved himself adept at recruiting fellow like-minded German lads to join the outfit and assist in building the new German Reich. This meant he was highly trusted as the man who encouraged everyone to join, earning him the reward of the high rank of SS Standartenführer, equivalent to an Oberst or Colonel, awarded by Heinrich Himmler himself. He lost his job at IG Farben in 1932 when they felt that his political activities were problematic for the company's image, so they gave him the sack. But by this point, I'm sure Eicke didn't much care, as he now had a much more interesting role. However, these activities brought him to the attention of the police, as the Nazi Party had not quite yet seized total power. Eicke was caught with a group of men preparing petrol bombs for an upcoming attack on another group of political enemies. He was convicted of incitement and sentenced to 2 years imprisonment, but, thankfully for him, the Bavarian Justice Minister, Franz Gärtner, was sympathetic to the Nazi Party, and would indeed go on to be Hitler's Justice Minister after the 1933 Enabling Act. Eicke was ordered by Himmler to make himself scarce and go to Italy for a while. His orders were to take advantage of the sanctuary of a fellow fascist state and set up training camps for Austrian Nazis, the party having been banned in the country. This he did, establishing a camp on the shores of Lake Garda, which even Mussolini visited as Eicke's guest, highly impressed with the healthy look of the growth of European fascism. Following Hitler's seizure of absolute power in January 1933, Eicke made his return home in the March. But this was not a triumphant return, as a bitter rivalry had broken out between him and the Gauleiter Joseph Bürkel, who used his power to have Eicke arrested and detained for a few months at a Würzburg asylum. Furthermore, Himmler heard about a spat with him and the Gauleiter and stripped Eicke of his SS rank and membership as punishment for insubordination. At the time, the Nazis established the first concentration camp at Dachau, 10 miles outside of Munich, along the lines of those previously enacted by Britain in Africa and the Spanish in Cuba much earlier. Yes, the Spanish invented the concentration camp, not the British. Dachau was used to house political prisoners and used the inmates as forced labour. However, in June of 1933, Himmler sanctioned the release of Eicke and reinstated his rank and SS membership, with a further golden handshake of 200 marks for his family. Indeed, he was promoted to the next rank up of Senior Colonel, or SS Oberführer. His release was timely, as Himmler suddenly found himself in need of a replacement for the first commandant of Dachau, SS Sturmbannführer Hilmar Wekerl, who had become problematic for his openly murdering some political prisoners at the camp, terming the action as a punishment, prompting a raft of complaints from other officers and guards. Eicke was the ideal man at the ideal time, being appointed to clear up the mess that his predecessor had left. Eicke's first major decision, with Himmler's blessing, was the formation of a permanent SS Guard unit to be stationed at the camp in place of the previous, which became known as the SS Wachverbände, literally SS Guard unit. This was to serve as a template for all other future camps. Despite his predecessor having done the same and been punished for it, Eicke now instituted a general order known as Postenpflicht, or Guard Duty, on the 1st of October 1933 that stated all attempted escapees would be immediately shot. This was possible with the new Guard unit, which were all loyal SS members, and as such didn't complain about orders to kill. Next came the Lagerordnung, or Camp Orders, essentially a penal code for prisoners. The document contained every conceivable infraction and fitting punishment for having committed them. More than this, though, it was a code of conduct for all camp personnel, which dictated their behavior and encouraged any witnesses to a failure to enforce the rules be reported to the newly established concentration camp inspectorate, a branch of the Reichssicherheitshauptamt, the Reichsmain Security Office. He also introduced the infamous blue and white striped pajama-type uniforms that served as prisoner uniforms, to mark them out from their immaculately dressed SS oppressors and as a subtle way to deny their individuality. The inspectorate was also responsible for seeing the doling out of punishments to be done, with no recourse of appeal. In this way, Theodor Eicke had almost single-handedly invented the whole insidious system that was to be the right hand of the Reich's enforcement and ethnic cleansing drive that would go on to commit a large bulk of the mass murder of the Holocaust. In 1934, Eicke was rewarded with his work with another promotion, this time to SS Brigadeführer, which is similar to a major general. This came in time for the Night of the Long Knives, in which the SS systematically eliminated the upper echelons of the SA to bring them to heel, as it was felt they had become too unruly and posed a threat of a possible coup. Eicke himself was present at the moment when Ernst Röhm was murdered in his cell. Indeed, according to the later trial of Michael Lippert, who was Eicke's co-accomplice in this incident, and later adjutant in the concentration camps, claimed that Eicke had gone inside the cell and shot Röhm whilst he remained outside the door. Make of that what you will. After all, Lippert was on trial for the murder, so it makes sense that he would entirely shift the blame. Eicke's unwavering loyalty to the party earned him another promotion to SS Gruppenführer, and appointed as the chief inspector of concentration camps and head of the Wachverbände. Given that he had pioneered the system, it was felt that there was none better to oversee their implementation than him. By 1935, seeing that the camp system had become a little fragmented, he decided to enact a mass reorganization. Small camps were dismantled or brought under the command of larger camps, such as Dachau, as dedicated sub-camps for specific slave labor sites, such as quarries and factories. 2 more large camps were established at Sachsenhausen, which had originally been a satellite camp of Dachau, and Oranienburg, where Eicke based himself as inspectorate head office. Eicke despised anyone who exhibited even a modicum of sympathy or mercy to any prisoner, seeing it as a weakness. He once famously announced that any SS man who as much as thought of showing any such weakness should resign immediately and become a monk. Part of his reforms included the redesignation of the guard unit to the SS Totenkopfverbände. They were no longer just guards, they were death's head units, a symbol appropriated from famous Prussian commanders in years gone by, such as Gebhard von Blücher. And if you get that reference, we are now friends. These efficiency refinements were so impressive that Eicke was now virtually untouchable to anyone who lusted after his position, such as Reinhard Heydrich, who had harbored desires, as head of the SD, to wrest the command of Dachau from him. But with this and many other subtle bits of sucking up to Himmler, the Reich's second most powerful man, Eicke was wearing gold-plated diapers. Again, if you get the reference. Between 1937 and 39, 2 more large camps were built inside Germany, Buchenwald and Ravensbrück, the latter of which was the Reich's only all-female camp, and was a replacement for the much smaller facility at Lichtenberg. With the so-called Anschluss, or union with Austria, came the need for more camps, and very soon work began on the Mauthausen camp network. However, with the outbreak of war, Eicke would be given new opportunities, quite possibly to avoid further tension with Heydrich, as Himmler gave Eicke the command of a whole new Waffen-SS division, partly made up with volunteers from camps who fancied a bit of action. This was dubbed the Totenkopf Division, and were amongst some of the most loyal and fierce fighters the SS had. In his absence, the camp inspectorate was slowly taken away from the Reichsmain Security Office, and placed under the remit of the SS Economic and Administrative Department due to the slave labor aspect, which was to be led by Oswald Poll. The Totenkopf Division saw heavy action in Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union of 1941, and the following year's summer offensive, culminating in the capture of Kharkov. However, their illustrious leader would not see the end of the war, or even the defensive action of his unit, as the Red Army surrounded them. Theodor Eicke was killed on the 26th of February 1943 when his plane was shot down over the battlefield of the Third Battle of Krakow near Lozowa. He was 50 years old. Friedrich or Fritz Hartjenstein. Camps: Sachsenhausen, Niederhegen, Auschwitz-Birkenau, Natzweiler-Struthof, and Flossenbürg. Born in Peine, Lower Saxony on the 3rd of July 1905, Hartjenstein's early years are something of a mystery. Like some other members of this list, what they did before they turned to the path of evil is now forever lost to time. What is known about him is that he became a guard at Sachsenhausen in 1938, and then to another quickly established camp named Niederhegen in Westphalia the following year. This camp was classed as a subcamp of Sachsenhausen and was used to house slave labour for the nearby castle at Wewelsburg, which Heinrich Himmler had conceived as being part of a grand ceremony when the Nazis achieved their expected final victory over all their enemies. He also centered his whole SS cult around the place, appropriating Old Norse culture and folklore along with other Germanic tales and heroes. One of the lesser-known camps, Niederhegen is nevertheless estimated to have claimed the lives of just under 1,300 people. In 1941, Hartjenstein's SS career took a turn for the more exciting and dangerous as he was transferred to a combat unit of the Waffen-SS, the 3rd Totenkopf Division, serving in the early push of Operation Barbarossa, before he was withdrawn from frontline duties the very next year. The expansion of Auschwitz to include the site of Birkenau in 1942 needed someone to oversee its construction and to take command of it upon its completion. Hartjenstein was the man chosen. This means that he was the man who was in day-to-day charge of the operations at Birkenau that very much involved the development of the gas chambers and crematoria both outside and inside the camp, and therefore has the blood of many hundreds of thousands of souls on his hands, and this notwithstanding any crimes he committed at the long list of other camps he was posted to. From May 1944 onwards, he was replaced by Josef Kramer as commandant of Birkenau, and instead was sent to Natzweiler-Struthof in the Alsace-Lorraine region of France as commandant. This camp was more geared toward the detention of political prisoners and partisans who were put to work in the nearby gypsum mine, but it still did have a small gas chamber and crematorium just outside the camp. However, unlike most others, this facility was not generally used for mass extermination, more selective murder, and was known to be used for human experiments, which were carried out extensively at the camp. But as the war dragged on, gassings did slowly become more regular. Around 22,000 people are thought to have died at Natzweiler-Struthof. Hartjenstein's final posting came in early 1945 when he was sent to Flossenbürg, as the Allied lines overran the Struthof camp, which was liberated by the US and Free French units on the 23rd of November 1944. Flossenbürg, near the modern-day border with the Czech Republic, was a remote and isolated location, unlike most other camps which tended to be near centres of population. This took advantage of a nearby granite quarry that produced dressed blocks of stone for many of the regime's grand building projects envisaged by Albert Speer. But later, from around 1943 onwards, the emphasis would switch to providing slave labour to a nearby Messerschmitt factory building fighter aircraft. The conditions at Flossenbürg were particularly brutal due to the many of the capos whom the SS appointed from the prisoner population as low-level overseers were made up of convicted violent criminals who were now given free rein to enact whatever whim of savagery they felt like, provided the work got done. Of course, these men were not immune from punishments by the SS guards, but still, the other prisoners now even had to worry more if they dared so much as stop working for the merest second. The final months of the camp's existence, whilst Hartjenstein was in command, quickly descended into barely organised chaos as it began receiving huge numbers of new prisoners that had been evacuated from other camps, most notably 5,500 from Krakow-Plaszow, who had arrived in the late summer of 1944, 9,500 more from Gross-Rosen, and further 2,000 from Auschwitz in early 1945. The camp simply did not have the capacity to house them all. This rapidly led to outbreaks of widespread diseases such as dysentery and typhus, as well as starvation. The high numbers of sick quickly overwhelmed the camp's infirmary facilities, such as they were, so many of them ended up being sent to Bergen-Belsen instead. Flossenbürg's current prisoners were already struggling enough to get enough food to survive, but these new influxes of people intensified the situation to crisis levels. Of course, the SS always had plenty to eat, but the rations for the inmates were not increased for the newcomers. They would all have to get by with even less, which naturally increased the death rate significantly. Not helped when even more prisoners arrived, this time 6,000 from Buchenwald. Some of these were filtered out though, as the Jews from this batch were sent on to Theresienstadt, while the rest stayed behind. Around a third of the estimated 100,000 prisoners who passed through the gates at Flossenbürg and its small network of subcamps never made it out. On the 14th of April, Himmler issued a desperate order that all camps should be evacuated, with not a single survivor left behind. 2 days later, around 1,700 prisoners were assembled, ready to depart, divided into columns of 100, each column guarded by 8 SS men who flanked either side. They were taken 4 miles away to a railway station and forced to board a rake of both open and closed wagons. However, not long into the journey, a US fighter plane spotted the train and strafed it with machine gun fire. This caused the SS guards to panic and flee. Naturally, this meant that unfortunately there were deaths and injuries to the prisoners. When the guards finally recovered their balls and returned to the train, they shot all those who had been injured. For a further 2 days, the prisoners were left aboard the train without food or water, causing even more deaths through starvation and thirst. Only 6 days after the prisoners had been marched away, Flossenbürg was liberated on the 23rd by the US Army. However, the train of inmates had been taken all the way to Schwarzenfeld, where the train was attacked once more by aircraft, which destroyed the locomotive. At this point, the surviving prisoners were forced to walk the rest of the way to the Theresienstadt camp. Around 750 of those were unable to continue and were summarily shot. One survivor told of this moment, quote, "The SS men joked and laughed during the shooting. The prisoners were led in groups of 15 to 20. They had to lie on the ground and were shot in the nape." Before they reached their destination, the group joined up with another march of death near Neukirchen-Balbini and arrived at Theresienstadt in the opening days of May. In all, the total number of those killed on the march, including those who were shot before it had even begun for being unable to make the journey, is thought to have been as high as 7,000. Once at the new camp, Hartjenstein and the rest of his SS colleagues ran away before the camp was liberated on the 8th of May by the Soviets, being amongst the largest camp population to be discovered by the Allies. Thankfully, Hartjenstein only enjoyed around a year of freedom before the long arm of the law rightly caught up with him. The British authorities that stayed behind in Germany arrested him on the 6th of June 1946 and were able to charge him with the murder of 4 female SOE agents, most likely at Struthof, and were sentenced to life imprisonment. But then, another charge was levelled at him, which was the attempted murder by hanging of an RAF prisoner of war, which is a specific war crime. For this, he received a death sentence. A little while later, he was extradited to France to answer for other crimes at Natzweiler Struthof, and was once again found guilty and again sentenced to death. He was held in a prison in Paris, waiting for his date with Madame Guillotine, but on the 20th of October 1954, he suffered a catastrophic heart attack and died at the age of 49. Ernst Heinrich Schmauser, Auschwitz Death Marches. Born in Hof, Bavaria, on the 18th of January 1890, Schmauser was the man responsible for leading the forced march from Auschwitz back into Germany as the Red Army advanced closer to the death camp. But long before this, it would appear that Schmauser was cut out to be an all-out war hero rather than a creature worthy of this list. He joined the German army in October of 1911 and proved himself as officer material, being sent to the military academy at Hanover, where he graduated with the rank of lieutenant or lieutenant, just in time for the outbreak of the Great War, where he served with both the 133rd and 183rd Infantry. He fought well, being promoted to Oberleutnant and an acting company commander. He gained several merits and awards during the war, including the Iron Cross 2nd and 1st Class, the Knight's Cross of the Order of Albert, the Knight's Cross of the Order of St. Heinrich, and the Silver Wound Badge for being wounded 3 times in battle, one of which being a gassing. Not a pleasant thought. After the armistice, the German army began to demobilize in February of 1919, and Schmauser was promoted once again to Hauptmann, or captain, before being released from military duty. He returned to civilian life, working as a bank clerk in the city of Zwickau in Saxony. He did not like this job, though, as he considered such work beneath him. But at the time, a job was a job. This period of his life brought him a family too, marrying in 1921 and having 2 children. However, it was in that same year that he also decided to join the Nazi Party's newly formed brown-shirted gang of thugs, the Sturmabteilung, or SA, with his military service quickly seeing him appointed to the head of the Zwickau branch. But the organization was banned in 1924 following Hitler's failed beer hall putsch, and so instead Schmauser aligned himself with the ultra-conservative group called the Völkisch Social Bloc that had loose similarities in philosophy and principles to the Nazi Party, but he generally kept a low profile politically speaking, although many former army officers at the time expressed much disquiet around the farce that was the Weimar Republic. In 1930, with the Nazi Party gaining far more ground politically, Schmauser decided to rejoin them, and, recognized as an Alterkämpfer or old fighter, he was awarded the Golden Party badge, despite one of the prerequisites for this being unbroken membership, his membership number being 215704. In the October of 1930, he made the switch to the SS, the more elite paramilitary force of the party that had quickly gained favor over the SA. His SS membership number was 3359, and he was given the rank of SS Sturmbannführer, equivalent to a major in the regular army. In the Reichstag elections of July 1932, Schmauser was elected as a Nazi Party deputy for the constituency of Leipzig. 2 years later, at Himmler's personal request, Schmauser was ordered to take command of the SS Gruppe Süd, based in Munich, which meant that he could finally leave his boring bank job and devote his full time to his SS duties. This sterling service would earn him yet another promotion, this time to SS Obersturmbannführer, which is like a senior major. Now that the SS had become the dominant force, and with rumours dripping into Hitler's ear that SS leader Ernst Röhm was plotting against him, and the fact that Röhm was gay, led Hitler to order the arrest and murder of every senior SA leader. This operation was planned to begin on the 30th of June 1937, and has become known as the Night of the Long Knives. Schmauser was directly involved in these arrests, and was even present when Röhm was visited in his cell at Stadelheim prison by fellow SS members Theodor Eicke, who we saw previously, and Michael Lippert. Schmauser would serve for only 2 weeks with the SS Totenkopf division in March of 1940, before he was transferred to a police unit instead, becoming leader of the Südost division that was based in Breslau, Silesia. This jurisdiction contained the Auschwitz concentration and extermination camp. Many projects that fell under Schmauser's purview called for a workforce, but he was absolutely delighted as he relayed to Himmler that he had the Jewish prisoners to draw from, as free workers were in drastically short supply, and the Jews cost nothing. 2 more promotions would soon follow, the first as General de Polizei in April of 1941, and finally General der Waffen-SS in June of 1944, pretty much the furthest he could go within the SS, assuming no one higher than him died. In the summer of 1942, Schmauser, Himmler, and the Gauleiter of Upper Silesia, Fritz Bracht, witnessed the first full gassing operation at the so-called Little Red House, just outside the fences at Auschwitz-Birkenau. They were all pleased with this result and ordered the operations be expanded, which would see another farm building nearby, thus converted, dubbed the Little White House, as well as the eventual extension of the rail spur into the heart of Birkenau, and more purpose-built gas chambers and crematoria within the complex. Therefore, it is correct to say that Schmauser had a hand in the direction and course of the Holocaust, turning it into a slick and efficient machine of murder. However, in the January of 1945, the situation was most decidedly not in the Nazis' favour, with the Red Army pushing back the front lines by the day, being able to throw millions of men at the Germans' rapidly dwindling resources. And so, in a bid to cover what they had been doing there, Auschwitz was evacuated. The gas chambers and crematoria and the huts that housed the Sonderkommando were blown up and left in ruins, which is what we still see today if we visit Birkenau. The main camp itself was left intact, including the gas chamber and crematoria, which had long since fallen out of use, and the SS had instead utilized it as an air raid shelter. After the war, with help of survivors, this gas chamber and crematoria was put back together using surviving materials that were lying around. Every man, woman and child that was still able to stand were ordered to walk all the way under armed guard from eastern Poland back into Germany, more specifically to other camps such as Bergen-Belsen and Dachau. The rest, who were too weak, were simply left to fend for themselves in the abandoned camps. Schmauser was the man tasked with organizing and commanding this operation that numbered around 56,000 prisoners. It became known as the Auschwitz Death March due to the massive numbers of people who were killed en route. Anyone who fell by the wayside, unable to continue, was callously shot and left to rot by the side of the road in full view of all other prisoners. They all knew the price of failing to walk the many miles every day, but with the meager food rations, the cold, and their already emaciated state, for a lot of people, their bodies simply gave out on them. By the time the shuffling and shambling column of humanity finally arrived at their destination, around 15,000 people had either died or been murdered along the way. On the 10th of February, Schmauser was in a Kubelwagen in a convoy of other vehicles near Altenrode. Here, they met a group of Wehrmacht soldiers who warned them not to go any further, as elements of the Soviet armoured spearhead had already penetrated the front line and were pouring through the gap. For whatever reason, Schmauser decided to ignore these sage warnings and continued by himself. He was never seen or heard from again. No one knows exactly what happened to him, and it is surmised that he was either killed straight away or captured by the Red Army and eventually executed on an unknown date. He was replaced in his roles by SS Obergruppenführer Richard Hildebrand. His family and the postbellum German government declared Ernst Heinrich Schmauser legally dead on the 31st of December 1945, which, if correct, would mean that he was 55 years old. Odilo Globocnik, Camp Belzec, and leader of Aktion Reinhard. Easily the least known of the high-ranking Nazis associated with the Holocaust, Odilo Lothar Ludwig Globocnik was born in the former Austro-Hungarian Empire in the free city of Trieste, now in Italy, on the 21st of April 1904. His father, Franz Globocnik, was a lieutenant in the cavalry of the Austro-Hungarian army, but being such a low-ranking officer, he struggled greatly for money, which he desperately needed to get married. Sadly, this led him to having to resign his commission and return to civilian life, working for the Austro-Hungarian mail service. In 1914, the family moved away from Trieste to a place called, this place, I'm not even going to try to pronounce it, but nowadays known as Brno-Lakovo. At the outbreak of the Great War, that same year saw Franz recalled to active duty as Europe plunged itself headfirst into an ultimately highly costly war. As soon as he was old enough, young Odilo chose to join the army, following in his father's footsteps by enrolling at the officers' training school, but the necessities of war saw his education cut drastically short. He later decided to join the Yugoslavian army, who were fighting in Slovenia at the time in a conflict known as the Carinthian War, which lasted from 1918 till 19, having first joined a pro-Austrian militia unit fighting in the same theatre. After this war ended, he returned to civilian life as a builder. By 1922, Odilo Globocnik decided to involve himself in politics and political violence, joining a nationalistic Carinthian paramilitary unit. During this time, he became engaged to a woman named Greta Michner, and was able to secure a job promotion through her father, who convinced the boss of a company called Kärntner Wasserkraftwerke AG to take Odilo on as a construction supervisor. Globocnik joined the Nazi Party quite late on, in early 1931, much later than most of the others in this series, further becoming a member of the Austrian wing of the SS in 1933. When he first joined the party, he distributed various propaganda leaflets and put up posters extolling the virtues of the party and denouncing its enemies. He was tasked with assisting the covert funneling of money and other supplies from Germany into Austria to fund the party there and to help sow the seeds of hatred. He was arrested in August of 1933 as he was caught trying to secretly contact imprisoned party members, as the Nazis were banned in Austria before the Anschluss. From here until 1935, he was thrown in jail a further 3 times on various low-level charges, which saw him serving a combined total of around a year locked up. It is widely believed by historians, although no hard proof exists, that Globocnik was involved in the 1933 murder of a Jewish jewelry merchant named Norbert Futterweit, which was one of the first recorded instances of Nazi attacks on Jews in Austria. He joined the German SS in September 1934, and his sterling services of the party thus far had not gone unnoticed. He was rewarded with swift promotion and appointed for a short time as Deputy Gauleiter of Vienna, but then transferred to the same post in Carinthia, where he further became the head of intelligence for the region between 34 and 36. And then he was promoted again, this time to Chief of Staff to the head of the Austrian Nazi Party, Herbert Klausner, a meteoric rise for someone who wasn't even Aryan. Given his role within the SS, it is certainly interesting to note the very obviously Slavic origins of Globocnik's name, which is Slovenian by descent, and his mother, Anna, was half Serbian and half Croat. This should have barred him from being in the SS, which was supposedly very strict on preserving the Aryan bloodline. I guess the virulently anti-Semitic and anti-Slavic facets of his personality was judged to outweigh his less than pure blood. He always maintained that he was of German ancestry to assuage those who deeply criticized his presence, although I have seen no evidence of his alleged Germanic roots. His father strongly aligned himself with the German identity, seeing it as a great strength, and insisted that the family learn and speak German at all times, thoroughly rejecting their true upbringing. But from what I can gather, it appears that the family were simply German-speaking Slavs. It certainly helped that Odilo had an ace in the hole, as he counted Heinrich Himmler as a firm ally, who insisted that his surname was simply a result of Slavicization, which helped to quell some of the louder dissenters. With the Anschluss between Austria and Germany on the 12th of March 1938, and with the Nazis now having zero barricades in their way to seizing power in the country, Globocnik gained yet another promotion, this time as Secretary of State for the new Nazi-led regime of Austria, which soon saw him appointed as the main Austrian representative in the Reichstag in Berlin, and then Hitler himself gave Globocnik the promotion of Gauleiter of Vienna in May. This guy collected job titles like Pokemon cards. In his role as Gauleiter, he gave a speech in which he said, amongst other things, quote, "I will not recoil from radical interventions for the solution of Jewish questions." Certainly a foreboding indicator of things to come. He also organized a Nazi exhibition in Vienna that proudly screened the newly released anti-Semitic propaganda film, The Eternal Jew. The exhibition received a staggering 10,000 people on its opening day. As you may know, the Nazis were very quick to stamp down on any voices of dissent, and they didn't care who fell under their heel. No one was immune. Even the Catholic Church of Austria had property confiscated under Globocnik's orders, and many priests who had expressed a dislike or outright opposition for the party were imprisoned in Dachau. Even the Cardinal of Vienna, Theodor Eicke, received a violent answer from the party when he denounced them and their treatment of the Catholic Church. Eicke's house was heavily vandalized as a result. This led to a large but ultimately short-lived mass resistance to the regime, as Catholics organized a huge protest following a church service in which they carried placards and yelled chants such as "Christ is our Führer." However, Globocnik fell afoul of the party when he was discovered to have been involved in foreign currency speculation, lining his own pockets instead of the party's. On the 30th of January 1939, he was officially stripped of his many posts and rank. He was transferred to the Waffen-SS at the rank of SS-Unterscharführer, or sergeant, and was put to work serving in the front lines during the Poland campaign in the SS Standarte Germania. But despite it being Himmler who had ordered Globocnik's punishment, he still saw the value of such a man who could be relied upon to follow orders without question, and was fully committed to the Nazi cause. With this in mind, by the end of the year, Globocnik was officially forgiven for his impropriety, and instantly promoted to SS Brigadeführer, or Brigadier General, which came with a nice cushy job in Lublin, as Chief of Police. His anti-Semitism saw the treatment of Jews in the area discriminated against most vehemently, and evacuations of them to forced labour camps began in earnest, as well as forcing them into ghettos. In a speech given in mid-February 1940, he said, quote, "The evacuated Jews should feed themselves and be supported by their countrymen, as these Jews have enough food. If this does not succeed, one should let them starve." He appointed as his second-in-command another man with an equally abhorrent attitude towards Jews, Christian Werth, who we saw in part 2 of this series. Globocnik's underlings described him as deriving huge joy from killing people by his own hand, taking part in many mass shootings and other atrocities, something he was certainly not expected to do, merely to oversee. Even Rudolf Höss described Globocnik as being highly enthusiastic about murder, and always wanted to be at the forefront of it. Even when a group of Jews who were sent to camps were too many to fit on the transports, he happily ordered and took part in all those excess numbers being summarily shot. Along with his oppo Wirth, Globocnik had a meeting with Himmler on the 13th of October 1941, following a memorandum he had sent to the Reichsführer, suggesting a new way to deal with the Jews. Globocnik is said to have told his boss that he had the idea of, quote, cleansing of the entire general government of Jews and Poles. Himmler loved this idea of wiping out a whole swathe of undesirables, so he gave his approval to begin construction of a new camp. This one was to be purely for extermination of Jews, and was to be at Belzec, southeastern Poland, 47 miles from Lublin. This was chosen as the site because of its proximity to both Lublin and the territory of Galicia, which had been taken as part of Operation Barbarossa, and so the Jews from both areas could be sent to Belzec for extermination. This move preceded the infamous Wannsee Conference that officially decided to implement the so-called final solution by 3 months. Only a few days after the meeting with Globocnik, Himmler, after discussing the feasibility of the idea further with Reinhard Heydrich, issued a decree that halted all Jewish immigration from the Reich, quote, in view of the forthcoming final solution to the Jewish question. The Belzec camp was completed under the supervision of Richard Thomala and Lorenz Hackenholt, who designed the gas chambers under the orders of Globocnik and Wirth. The gas chamber took inspiration from those used during the Action T4 euthanasia program, and used carbon monoxide from internal combustion engine exhausts to murder. The Belzec gas chamber had an engine from a tank permanently mounted outside, with the exhaust piped into the room of a wooden barrack building, insulated with a mixture of rubber and sand to keep the gas contained. So, when you see some moron trying to deny the Holocaust by saying wooden doors like it's a gotcha, it isn't. The fact that many people commit suicide in their garages by leaving their car engines running proves that you don't need a totally gas-tight room to work. Just say, nice try, dickhead, but fail. Anyway, the camp was nominally completed in February 1942, becoming the first purely extermination camp in the general government of Poland, and gassing operations began the very next month, with staff from T4 being drafted in to oversee the process. It is quite possible that, had Heydrich not been assassinated just before the commencement of the final solution, it could well have been called Action Odilo instead. With the commencement of Action Reinhard, the mass murder program, 3 more camps were constructed under Globocnik's orders. These were at Treblinka, Sobibor, and Chelmno. I have already made full documentaries about Treblinka and Sobibor, link in the description. Globocnik expressed a personal preference for using carbon monoxide instead of Zyklon B like at Auschwitz or Majdanek. This was purely from a pragmatic standpoint, as it was cheaper, and it did not rely on extra deliveries of supplies aside from fuel, which it would be getting anyway. Plus, pretty much all of his underlings had experience in the use of monoxide and therefore needed no extra training. Over the years of the war, Globocnik was directly responsible for many other atrocities, such as the liquidation of the Warsaw and Bialystok ghettos in May and August of 1943 respectively. He sent around 95,000 Jews to various forced labour camps in the Lublin district, and had a further 45,000 at his personal disposal. And of course, before Belzec was built, he had overseen the forced resettlement of many hundreds of thousands of people in the name of ethnically cleansing Poland. During Action Reinhard, Globocnik oversaw all the seizures of Jewish property in the liquidated ghettos and from the camps, all of which he was supposed to send back to the Reich's main security office in Berlin. But his old habits came back, as such a massive hoard of wealth was far too tempting to simply leave alone. And so he began creaming off various valuables and money for himself, lining his own pockets at the Jews' expense. This was strictly against the rules, and if he was caught, he could face imprisonment and possibly even execution from stealing from the Reich. When the war began to turn against Germany in a dramatic way in late 1943, Himmler ordered Globocnik to end Action Reinhard and destroy all evidence of its existence. The extermination camps were dismantled and their sites concealed by planting trees and ploughing the ground over. By November of that year, the deed was done. Globocnik sent Himmler the final report from Trieste, confirming the liquidation of all of the Reinhard camps, and gave numbers of those killed at each one during their operation. All the remaining camp guards had been ordered to Trieste to help root out Italian partisans. Some in the modern day have speculated that this was a shrewd attempt to rid the Reich of further evidence by erasing the very people who carried it out. Indeed, many former guards were killed at the hands of partisans before the war ended, including Christian Wirth. Himmler sent a reply deeply thanking Globocnik for the great service he rendered to the Reich and the German people throughout the entirety of Action Reinhard. The remainder of the T4 and Reinhard men set about building a new detention centre for suspected partisans and Italian Jews, which was converted from a building of an old rice mill. This complex was known as the Risiera di San Saba, and was equipped with a crematorium and prisoner cells. Very quickly, many thousands of people were rounded up and brutally interrogated about insurgency activities, and of course many of these were murdered as a result. Indeed, between its establishment in early September of 1943 till its partial liquidation at the end of 1945, it is estimated that as many as 5,000 people were killed at San Saba. As the Allied lines advanced, Globocnik was forced to hide away in the Carinthian countryside, but he was tracked down by the British Army on the 31st of May. He was found hiding up a 4,100-foot mountain named Moslacher Alm by the 4th King's Own Hussars. He was dragged away to Paternion to be questioned, but just as he was about to be interrogated, he bit down on a cyanide ampule that he had concealed in his mouth. He fell to the floor, gasping and twitching like a gaffed fish, until he finally drew his last breath of stolen oxygen on this earth. He was 41 years old. Globocnik's body was taken to a nearby church, but the priest refused point-blank to bury a man like him in hallowed ground, and so the British simply dug a hole outside the cemetery and dumped the corpse in, deservedly without ceremony. It's just such a shame, and a cheat, that the world did not get to see Globocnik's crimes laid bare in open court, and to see his date with Albert Pierpoint to fit in with a very tight scarf. Legacy. As we have seen over the course of this series, it does not take much for seemingly normal and, dare I say, even sane individuals to stray from the path of good. Some of the acts we have heard about truly boggle the mind to even contemplate, let alone commit, and yet commit they most certainly did. The Holocaust is arguably the most scrutinized event in human history, and still we are discovering even more information as the years go by. What more horrific surprises are out there lurking in the shadows waiting to be brought to the light? Who knows? But it is an all too scary thought that these things could easily happen all over again. We seem hell-bent on destroying each other, and whenever someone comes along and tries to bring these people together and talk instead of fight, they get assassinated. Why must we be like this? Why must we constantly choose the path of violence and evil? Can we ever change, or are we doomed to slaughter each other until the last man stands? One need only look at the ongoing but virtually unheard of genocides in Nigeria, Sudan and Yemen, and others, to see that clearly lessons have not sunk in. And then we have the messy web of lies coming out of Gaza, which at least gets plenty of coverage, but mostly because it gives Westerners another chance to openly hate Jews with no consequences, as no one is going to blow you up for it. I do truly despair for the future of our species. If we can do this to ourselves, imagine what we would do to others. No wonder aliens haven't visited us yet. They probably take one look and think, whoa, fuck that noise, and steer well clear. And who could blame them? We are not the only animal that kills for sport or pleasure, but we like to pretend that we are somehow better than animals. We are not. We are nothing more than bestial, brutal, sadistic animals, and can anyone say with a straight face that we all deserve goodness? I do not believe so. Where have all the young men gone? Gone for soldiers, everyone. When will they ever learn? When will they ever learn? Pete Seeger. Thank you for watching this video. I do hope you found it informative and interesting. If you did, please hit the like button as it helps increase the reach, and do consider subscribing to DID for even more great videos just like this one. Don't forget to check out my back catalogue to see the other parts of this series and other fantastic in-depth documentaries just like this. If you wish to do so, you can support DID on Patreon, link in the description, or you can become a member right here on YouTube to gain access to my latest uploads, or if you prefer to give a one-off donation, you can do so by the Super Thanks button. And of course, there is the DID merch store on Teespring should you wish to grab some high-quality branded swag. And don't forget to check out my alternate channel DID Reads to hear more beautifully narrated content with a much more safe-for-work vibe. And in the meantime, take care of yourselves, then I shall see you on our next descent into darkness.